It's 5 o'clock. We'll call the special meeting of the Broken Arrow Planning Commission meeting to order for Thursday, October 30th, 2018. Would you call the roll, please?
Pablo Aguirre.
Here.
Mark Jones.
Here.
Fred Durrell. Lee Welpley.
Here.
Ricky Jones.
Here. Item number 3 is old business. We have none. Item number 4, consideration of the consent agenda.
Item 4A is for the approval of BAL 2037 for Sound Mind. This property is approximately 19.5 acres, Zone CG and PUD 297, located a half-mile north of Tucson Street, west of Aspen Avenue, and north of the Creek Turnpike.
Any questions of staff on the lot split? For those of you in the audience that may not be familiar with our consent agenda process, this is generally a routine item, a minor item that we may have seen before, and staff has made a recommendation. Since there's only one item, we're going to consider it with one motion unless somebody in the audience would like to have this one particular item removed from the consent agenda and discussed separately. So at this time, is there anybody in the audience that would like to have item 4A removed from the consent agenda and discussed? Seeing none?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve item 4A on the consent agenda per staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda item 4A 18-1056 per staff recommendation.
Pablo Aguirre.
Yes.
Mark Jones.
Yes.
Lee Welpley.
Yes.
Ricky Jones.
Yes. Item number 5 is items removed from the consent agenda. There were none. Item 6, public hearings, A 18-1020.
Yes, Chairman, Planning Commission. This public hearing item is in regards to making modifications to the Broken Arrow zoning ordinance, specifically in regards to section 3.1F of table 3.1-1, table of allowed uses, section 5.4, table 4.4.1, off-street parking schedule A, and section 10.3.D.1, definitions of general uses and categories and specific use types, and sections 10.3.D.9, definitions and general uses, categories, and specific use types of the Broken Arrow zoning ordinance. Modifications to the Broken Arrow zoning ordinance are being proposed with the established regulations for retail medical marijuana dispensaries and medical marijuana commercial growing cultivation facilities. The reasons for the update is in regards to recent passage of State Question 788 and subsequent changes to Title 63. I'm going to kind of go through the staff report and explain some things as staff had kind of processed them, and I have a PowerPoint presentation as well to kind of go through to help maybe answer some questions as we process this change to the zoning ordinance. As these particular use types are not something that was envisioned underneath the 2008 City of Broken Arrow zoning ordinance, it is necessary to adjust the zoning code to new uses that have become legal underneath Oklahoma law. Through many meetings, staff has drafted and proposed modifications to section 3.1.f of table 3.1, table of allowed uses. It is proposed to add 2 subcategories to section 3.1.f underneath the table of allowed uses. Through research, staff has determined most medical marijuana growing is conducted in enclosed facilities. Staff has determined that this type of environment would best be established in the IL and IH, which would be the industrial light, industrial heavy zoning districts, and that this must be done, that this type of growing would be done within a building. So looking at the table, staff is proposing to make these changes here, adding underneath agricultural, the medical marijuana commercial growing, and adding, making that only permissible underneath the IL and IH zoning districts. In addition, we add in the definitions section for medical marijuana growing and cultivation that it would be regulated and established underneath Title 63 of the State of Oklahoma, and that would be completed within the building. So those are the 2 modifications specific to growing of medical marijuana. The manufacturing is thought of as it is a product that would be cultivated and it would be manufactured. Staff had determined that there was not necessarily a need to change the zoning ordinance for that type of use, as our current code allows for the flexibility of that. And so staff would interpret this as an allowed use underneath manufacturing light, which would be permissible in the IL and IH zoning district. That's the definition currently of what manufacturing light is, and so staff has read this and has interpreted that this type of use would be possible within that type of definition. Looking more closely at this, these are the industrial districts within the city of Broken Arrow. The lighter gray is the light industrial, and the darker gray is the heavy industrial. And so these are the districts that this type of use would be permissible in. Moving forward, staff looked closely to related uses of medical marijuana dispensaries. Underneath Title 63, Section 420A, states that all applicants for medical marijuana licenses must be 18 years of age or older. A special exception is granted to an applicant under the age of 18. However, applicants who are underneath the age of 18 must have someone who's over 18 to actually go into the dispensary and make the purchase on their behalf. In addition, it states that medical marijuana dispensaries cannot be located within 1,000 feet from any public or private school entrance. And the zoning code does define schools as public or private facilities for colleges, universities, elementary, middle school, high school, and trade schools. The zoning code does not specifically state that child care facilities do not include public or private schools, meaning that underneath the Broken Arrow zoning code, if we were try to extend the use or the definition of schools to child care facilities, the zoning code already has that established within the code, stating that they are not identical, they are not the same use. So we have already established that zoning that definition. When staff began the analysis, staff first thought that classifying medical marijuana dispensary and retail sales under being similar to pharmacies. Pharmacies are permitted use in the use group of general retail, but when comparing a pharmacy type use, staff looked at companies like Walgreens and CVS. These types of facilities are not restricted by law on all sales by age, nor are the locations to a school or other facilities. As most general retail does not have such limitations, it was determined that general retail was not the best category to define medical marijuana dispensaries and retail sales. Staff concluded that such a use most closely related to alcohol beverage retail sales, as the purchase of medical marijuana is strictly restricted by age and by distance to a school, public or private. By doing so, this would be permissible. This type of use would be permissible in the commercial mixed use, commercial or downtown mixed use, CN zoning district, CG zoning district, CH zoning districts, and areas 6 and 7 of the DROD overlay district. So the proposed change would add this, the red medical marijuana retail underneath retail sales, and then those uses would be permissible by right in those zoning districts. And then we've added this definition to the definition section of the ordinance, stating that medical marijuana retail sales and alike are established underneath the state statutes, and that they are measured from 1,000 feet from any public school entrance. That is what was established by the rules that has been set forth by the state, and so all we are doing is just reinforcing those rules as set forth in the zoning ordinance. So when looking at, staff has compiled this map showing that where the areas are within the zoning, within the city of Broken Arrow, where under the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance, where medical marijuana dispensaries and retails would be permissible by right. The purple circles are where they're 1,000 feet from a school entrance approximately. Again, it is up to the dispensary in order to comply with state law. that they must do their own measurement and prove that to the state. And so they will have to go out through state practices to ensure that they are meeting the state law. So, you know, it says from an entrance, we are interpreting that not just from the front entrance, from any side entrance, anything along those lines. So therefore, there may be some shift in these purple areas by 100 feet or so. But again, that's going to be the responsibility of the dispensary to ensure that that is correct. Let me make sure. Okay, so there are some additional changes. Because we're adding new categories, we had to make sure that parking was in there. So there is a change within the parking table so that dispensaries, they meet the same as general retail of having one parking spot for every 300 square feet of space. For manufacturing and growing, they have one space for every 1,500 square feet of space. So that was added as well. We are here to really have an open dialogue and discussion about this item, as this is something very unique and something that has not really come to the Planning Commission before probably a number of good years. So I'm here to answer any questions that you may have, and of course there is a public hearing portion of it as well.
In my mind, as a planner, I read through it, and it looked like it was nothing more than adding a use unit or a permitted use, and all the restrictions that go with it. I really liked the map aspect of it because, again, as a planner, I was afraid we might put so many rules and regulations on the particular use that in planning world it's called exclusionary zoning, that you've got this permitted use, but there's no place it can go because there's got to be setbacks from this and distance from that. But the map was very helpful. So I'm very confident that the additions to the zoning code and the map and everything are nothing more than an additional use unit with restrictions on parking and setbacks and those types of things. And I'm very comfortable with it. My only question would be, I'm not that familiar with the state regulations, but I'm sure from staff, from the city's standpoint, this pretty much parallels what the state's trying to do.
It does. I mean, at this point, what staff has proposed has not been anything more restricted than what the state has from a zoning standpoint. Now, of course, City Council through the City Attorney's Office will be looking at an ordinance in regards to medical marijuana as well, and that will be going before City Council on the 4th, I believe. Is that correct, Trevor?
That's right. It's going to a second preview. The ordinance related to the licensing for the local licensing. It also tracks the state licensing requirements very closely. So I think your comments well taken that it's an attempt to regulate it according to the state law and the Department of Health regulations that we have.
Because what you're talking about has nothing to do with the zoning code. Your ordinance regulates it through other city laws, not the zoning code.
Right, and the preview ordinance that's going on the 4th just refers and incorporates by reference the zoning decisions that would be made in terms of the location. It simply would say that licenses would not be issued to an applicant unless it's allowed in the zoning location, which has to be decided as well through this process.
Okay.
I have a
Go ahead.
couple of comments, and I don't know if it's the appropriate time, but I have some recommendations and things that I've kind of seen and I'm happy to share with them. As you said, it's an open dialogue. I did some research. Again, I'm not a planner, but usually when I'm confronted with a situation where I want to kind of figure out what should I put into place, what I did was I looked at other zoning ordinances for other cities, and what I went was kind of across the internet and looked at communities that are similar to Broken Arrow and states that had laws passed to approve medical marijuana and things like that, and what those zoning ordinances approved and were allowed and what caveats are in. Now, the state is going to obviously make an overarching and it's going to be the least restrictive, and then it's going to be up to the community to decide what fits that community necessarily. Now, there are some things that I feel I've seen repetitiously throughout looking at a lot of these other zoning ordinances that I feel would be applicable to some of the things that I saw on here, and so I just wanted to kind of go over some of those and see if any of those might resonate with some of the fellow commission members and things like that, and also just to see if some of these make sense. One thing that I wanted to come across was the part where it doesn't mention a child care facility in the law. And what I've seen kind of across several states and several communities is the addition of the child care language is separate. So not just 1,000 feet from a public or private school as defined by the law, but also child care facilities as a separate subcategory, because they are non-inclusive in pretty much every other state that I looked at. I think that would correlate with the same kind of mentality of having it in front of schools. Same scenario. There was a mention of things like halfway houses, correctional facilities, which Broken Arrow has, putting a buffer distance for that. Also, there was buffer distances for facilities engaging in the same sort of business. Some of the more extreme side of things were like public parks or libraries and things like that, arcades, places where there's plenty of youth. And then also a caveat reducing the distances for things such as research facilities that were not necessarily retail, but were under the same kind of zoning ordinance. Most did not apply to childcare, reducing the buffer to schools or childcare facilities, but some of the other ones. And I think those are valid considerations for a zoning ordinance. Like I said, ours only has one buffer zone, whereas most, if not all, of the ones that I've seen have many more buffer zones within them. And I'm wondering if it's a city decision to do that, because I'm sure you guys looked at the same thing, or if it's something that you're willing to contemplate, because some of those, I feel like childcare facilities is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the problem that we run into in our state law versus other state laws, and Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong on this analysis, of course, is that our state law was so restrictive on our capabilities of zoning. It specifically states that we are prevented from making zoning to where it's restrictive for a retail facility to be able to go in. And so with that type of analysis, we were trying to provide a plate for the Planning Commission to kind of look at and see, are there additional buffers that we would like to put in place? But at the same time, a lot of those states that you're referencing allows for the cities to make those determinations. They allow for those restrictions to be put in place. Trevor, do you want to go into a little bit more detail about that? You've done more research into the restrictive nature of the state law.
Sure. Again, Trevor Dennis, Acting City Attorney for the City of Broken Arrow. I think your point is well taken in terms of the regulations and buffer zones and areas. And I think it goes back to the chairman's point. First off, is we need to be careful not to have a regulatory exclusion. And the second is, again, if you look at the exact specific language of State Question 788, it speaks in terms of prohibiting local municipalities from unduly restricting the zoning, specifically for dispensaries, that would preclude them. And so if you look at the specificity of it, there's only one exclusion, which is for the schools and for public and private schools. Obviously, one of the solutions to that would be if the state legislature would regulate this area, pass a law that expanded and had more clarification on what areas could be offset. But the second issue is in order to comply with the State Question 788, and from our research with other communities and the Oklahoma Municipal Association, we could have additional setbacks. The risk that we're running is it would be challenged in court, and I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how a court or legislature is going to definitely decide on that. Our best analysis at this point is that compliance with State Question 788 would allow the 1,000-foot setback for the private and public schools. It doesn't look like at this point it necessarily would support those additional setbacks. It may. We certainly can make a good faith argument, as some of these other communities have, but that's the analysis that we've done in terms of those additional setbacks.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I understand what the city's saying. It doesn't sound like we can't, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not talking about changing what the requirement would be within a zoning area. What we're talking about is we're limiting its distance or proximity from somewhere. Not necessarily, we're not talking about changing, what the qualification for a certain zoning would be for commercial use or things like that. What we're talking about is as long as it's zoned commercial and not within the distance, you can build whatever you want, right? That's still the case. I guess my question is, are you saying the state does not allow us to put buffer zones forward? Or are you saying the state allows us to put buffer zones forward at the risk of judicial process or something like that?
The statute as it's currently written allows one buffer zone specifically in the language of the statute, which is the 1,000 foot buffer zone, which is contemplated under the zoning proposal. Any additional buffer zones, I can't tell you with any amount of certainty what a court or the legislature would say specifically on if they would survive a challenge. Potentially they may not. Our best analysis at this point is regulating per the state statute is the most prudent course.
Okay. I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? At this time, we'll open the public hearing on the item, and these are the amendments to the zoning code, item 6A 18-1020. Are there any interested parties in the audience that wish to speak on what's before the Planning Commission, and that is the amendments to the zoning code? Yes, sir. If you'd come down and give us your name and address. And we have a taping system, so we need to be able to pick you up on the microphone.
Hello, my name is Jack Carlson. You want my address?
Yes, sir.
1509 Pecan Circle, here Broken Arrow,
Thank you.
74011. I just want to be clear on the growing facility. The restrictions are not the same as this dispensary of 1,000 feet from a school. Is that correct?
Underneath the proposed zoning change, that is correct. Underneath this, again, Planning Commission or Council may make modifications to that, but underneath the proposal, they would be allowed within the IL and IH zoning district. No buffer would be associated with that.
IL, night. Okay. Indoor grow, light industrial, and
Or heavy industrial.
heavy industrial, and that's the only restriction.
As
I mean, besides meeting all health code and all that kind of stuff.
all state,
As far as zoning goes.
as far as zoning goes, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on the amendments to the zoning code? Again, this is the public hearing, and we will make a recommendation that will be forwarded onto the city council, where they'll have another hearing and then vote to adopt, modify, or deny that. So at this time, any other people wish to speak on the amendments to the zoning code? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Questions, comments, discussion, or a motion?
Well,
I think he's got a comment.
yeah, I just wanted to, if possible, Commissioner Aguirre's comments was that, the exclusionary zones, the buffer zones, are something that we can definitely talk about. There is also the ability, staff has made suggestions to you for zoning districts that these can go in. I was trying to prepare for all things for this meeting, and so if there were commissioners that were wanting to restrict it further in zoning districts, only restricting it to 2 zoning districts, that would be commercial general and commercial heavy, this is where they could go. If they were wanting to only do commercial heavy, this is where they could go. And if they were just wanting to do commercial general, this is where they could go up on the screen. So just trying to state that, putting buffer zones is an idea, of course. And as Trevor said, it can be challenged, but also, it is within the Planning Commission and, of course, City Council's authority to decide exactly where these dispensaries can go. So it is up to you to make those decisions, and I'm just providing all opportunities for you to provide input as well. We also, through staff, have talked about other growing places as well, agricultural. We just felt like this nature of growing, mostly with commercial development, has to be done indoors. We felt for Broken Arrow it would be a better fit to have it in IL and IH zoning districts rather than just agricultural or in agricultural.
I have another comment. Is as far as A1 zoned areas, right? A1s could potentially become CH, CG, whatever.
As you know, we have a comprehensive plan that clearly indicates where those types of uses can be done within the city of Broken Arrow, and IL and IH. IL is permissible in level 6 with a PUD, and permissible is possible for a zoning change in I7 or level 7 for IL and IH. So there could be potentially new districts that could be created that this use would be permissible in, but again, that would require a zoning change to come before this planning commission.
Yeah, and that's how I interpreted this map. Isn't a final say on where they could go. There's other potential properties out there that, in accordance with the comprehensive plan, and once approved by the planning commission or city council, would, and likewise, they could be commercial now and rezoned to something else. And so that map is a living map that's going to change, just like any other use. So I tried to look at it, like I said, it's just a different use that we're regulating.
This is as of today.
Today,
we could possibly.
And I'm comfortable regulating it. I tried to see similar to a liquor store, because it is regulated by age of 18 getting in there, and I'm comfortable with it. Wherever a liquor store can go, I'm really okay with where the dispensaries can go.
I think it's fairly reasonable right now.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to do something so that we can work off it in the future. If we don't, if we sit and bang different ideas out, like you're saying, we may end up in litigation.
Right. Okay. Other discussion, comments, staff? And you're looking for some type of a motion
Yes.
where, if approved
This
or
would-
modified, would go on to the city council.
Yeah, this would actually go
Okay.
relatively quickly to City Council on September 4th
September 4th.
as a preview ordinance.
Okay.
I'll make a motion, we approve item 6A, 18-1020, as per staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve item 6A, 1820, the amendments to the zoning code per staff recommendations.
Pablo Aguirre,
No.
Mark Jones,
Yes.
Lee Welpley,
Yes.
Ricky Jones.
Yes. So this item was recommended for approval, so it will be transmitted on to the city council on September 4th. If there's anybody in the audience that wishes to speak at that meeting, there's a procedure that you'll need to sign up for before the city council meeting in order to speak at that meeting. So thank you for coming down, and that concludes that item. Next is item 7, appeals. We have none. 8, general commission business. Have none. Remarks, inquiries, comments of the planning commission staff. We have none. We need one more motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn at 5:29.
Pablo Aguirre,
Yes.
Mark Jones,
Yes.
Lee Welpley,
Yes.
Ricky Jones.
Yes. Thank you, staff. Good job.
Yeah. That's
I